thank you everyone for joining us today at this session. You have come to Go Open Humanities, Building Bridges Between Scholarship and Teaching with Open Education Resources, of which I will refer to today as OER. And again, I want to thank you for taking some time on a Friday to join us. This has been a pretty crazy week in a sideways world for quite some time, and I know we're all tired of looking at Zoom screens and communicating with each other through technology, but I do find it valuable to be able to, as much as I regret not being in Connecticut with you, being able to visit you from my home in Chapel Hill, North Carolina today. The agenda today over the next hour or so will be an opportunity for me to introduce you to resources. I'm going to share with you a new digital library called the Humanities in Class Digital Library. But honestly, I think platforms and technology and resources are really only as valuable as the currency of the material itself. So I've identified some key themes that I'd like to give you some examples to illustrate how the library works. And the theme that I decided for today, a little bit in reaction to the week we're in, is titled Song of Myself, Exploring the Language of Identity. So that's what I'm going to show as an example, but please know that that's just one of many themes or topics that you can explore using this resource as we move forward. I also want to introduce you to the the National Humanities Center. The center can be found on both of the websites that you see on the screen. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put the digital library URL in the chat box. So you're more than welcome to open that as a separate window. You're more than welcome to go and explore while you listen to my voice or follow along in the presentation. It won't disrupt me or disturb me at all. I'm not going to be moving my mouse around a website too much today because I don't find that that's a super effective way of showcasing how to use the tool, but I will describe it. And again, I'm going to focus on some specific resources to do that. The National Humanities Center is located in Durham, North Carolina. We are the only, I'm going to say this, it's going to sound a little bit like hyperbole, but I'm pretty sure we're the world's only independent, fully nonprofit humanities research center in the world. So in 1978, the center was formed as a place for university professors and academics and scholars to do their research in the humanities. And since then, we have welcomed and served a little over 1,400 of those scholars. So scholars from around the country and increasingly from an international audience apply to the center for a fellowship year. If their project is selected, then they move to North Carolina. Sometimes they move their families and they come to this building, the center, every day for a year, completely unencumbered research and writing and conversation in the humanities. In some ways, if you were to hover over the front door there that leads into our commons area, you might see this as a laboratory, except what you won't find are lab coats and Bunsen burners and calipers. You'll find all the tools of the humanities, right? You'll find primary source collections, you'll find ancient writings, you'll find text and verse, you'll find material culture and song and art and objects. And really, in some ways, I think it's, it's not too much emphasis to say that this is where the humanities are created. We get about 700 applicants a year. We accept about 35 scholars. So, this is a pretty established and innovative and creative set of academics who are writing about and thinking about the ways the humanities can help us in this ever complicated world that we live in. The conversation I hear more now than maybe ever before, though, is the way that the humanities, history, social sciences, political science, geography, the way that the humanities can really offer a voice of authority and a voice of expertise to give us some path to who we are. That the humanities, if nothing else, offers a very clear roadmap for our identity and the way that we interact with others in our community and the responsibilities of us to that community, that we can connect with people who lived many, many years ago or wrote in a completely different context and somehow speaks to us and somehow offers clarity. And I would think that in some ways that offering the humanities in that sense suddenly elevates it beyond, the subjects you teach when all the important things are done, or the extra stuff that you worry about when you have free time to read and enjoy things like truth and beauty and aesthetics and ways to celebrate and ways to articulate loss and and betrayal and love and connection. And so the Humanities Center at its core is designed to advance the humanities along those core missions. And through our education department, we attempt to do that with working teachers. So when I use the term education, I very much mean this in an agnostic way. We work with K-12 educators across the country. We also work quite a bit with collegiate level educators and also with what I would call informal educators like museum docents or archivists or librarians. And the idea, the notion, I think, is that these emerging understandings, this idea of the way that the humanities can be understood should be infused in anything we do instructionally at any level. So whether you're an elementary school teacher in Los Angeles Unified, or a high school teacher in Pensacola, Florida, or a university professor in Chicago, or a great colleague and contributor to our site like Ann Prescott, who can offer those kinds of insights. This is really a way to create a conversation between those worlds. That professional scholars and experts in fields can also work with professional educators to design some really innovative and important work. When we do that those kinds of activities, I'm going to describe some of them to you today. Then we generate content. Many content providers, many of the organizations that are represented at the conference today, many of those that you trust and you go to for resources, those organizations have long been putting resources online. And that was a wonderful start 20 years ago, right? Digitizing things and getting them online. But I think what we're most interested now in making this content, after making this content accessible, is also supporting the influence of that content in the daily practice of you as educator leaders. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that this library does that. And then finally, our goal is, as I mentioned earlier, is to really create an advocacy for it, an understanding of the humanities, and why it's a set of really critical skills and experiences and vocabulary that allows us to engage in the world we live in. I was fortunate to be a member of the North Carolina Council for Social Studies Board and also of the National Council for Social Studies Board of Directors for 3 years. And I can tell you that NCSS and CCSS is dedicated to the support of using and finding ways that the social studies can improve our life. And I'd like to offer that the Humanities Center does that, all the organizations represented in our conference does that, and I'm hoping that the resources I share with you today will advance those kinds of interests. So there are a couple of ways that we directly connect scholars and educators, and I'm going to share this only as an invitation. Our work is free and open, so anything I share with you does not come with a cost. It does come, however, with a direct pipeline to the world that I'm describing. And one of those is our weekly Humanities in Class webinar series. Sometimes twice a week, I lead a 90-minute webinar in the evening, 7 p.m. East Coast time, that features a lead scholar, often associated as a past fellow at the center, sometimes not. And we ask them to help us make sense of this world we live in. We certainly talk about teaching, but really these are intended to be sessions to inform and to illustrate resources and sources and emerging understandings of these topics. I would encourage you and welcome you to any of our sessions. We average somewhere around 325 attendees per session. Again, these are educators from all over the country, and I would love to have anybody from the Connecticut schools and education community join us. We've got a bunch of great ones coming up. Take a look at our website for the full list of, I think we probably have about 35 left to go until early May. But some that seem to make sense in the context of this week are sessions that are intended to help us understand our American identity. And that begins next Tuesday night with Kunal Parker, who's a past fellow and who will be working with us on how to understand key points of immigration history and citizenship and ways to teach that. And then moving forward, we will work with some other names you might recognize, including Victoria de Francesco Soto from University of Texas on Mexican-American immigration. And then later in the spring, Heather Cox Richardson, who writes a daily blog that is very popular in terms of adding that historian lens to current events and what's happening in our daily lives. We also have a pretty rich portfolio of online courses, and these courses are intended to be a little bit more immersive, 5 weeks in length, 5 modules long, about 3 to 5 hours of work per week. They do earn 35 professional credit hours and have been endorsed by most states across the country. We're developing courses all the time. One that will be opening for the first time next week is this course on water rights and land access, Native American history today. And this will be incorporating libraries, Congress resources, and other scholarly materials that we've curated. So that's an introduction to the center, and I wanted to add that as a context to what I'm sharing now, partly for credibility, partly for to give you some sense of where the content's coming from and the ways that we invite and then collaborate with other partner organizations. I love this cartoon. It was published in February 1st, 1959, and it is absolutely prescient the way that they were able to imagine a world where all of man's data was available with a click of a button. It's a lovely image. Even six or seven decades ago, it seemed like science fiction. It seemed like something that could never happen. But sure enough, here we are with devices in our pockets and hands that give us that access. Access is important, but what I'm going to offer today is that OER, or open education resources, are even more important because they offer three very specific and very reliable variables. The first is it's free. The second is it's open, meaning that the copyright allows you by free use to use it in your classroom any way you like. And then thirdly, and what I want to share at the end, is how you can actually not just consume, but produce and publish work in an OER platform like the Humanities in Class Digital Library. So I'm going to talk some about all of those concepts today, but I'm going to do it again with some very specific resources and themes to give you some examples. So first, let's start just by considering what OER is. The quote on the right is a quote that was published a handful of years ago. So, you know, as quickly as information changes and moves today, it almost feels a little bit outdated. But what's even more outdated is the image on the left. Now, I don't know you guys, I can't see you in the Zoom room, but I remember these flash bulbs vividly from when I was a kid. And if you don't remember them, they were, you had to purchase them separately and attach them to the top of your camera. And then when you took a photograph, the flash bulb would go off, puff, and then it would rotate when you advance the film. So as you can see, you get 4 flashes per bulb. Who knows where these are, by the way, now? They're probably sitting in a landfill somewhere, not degrading. If I were to tell my kids that this is what you had to do, my kids, by the way, are a little bit older. My son's a senior in high school, my daughter's in college. If I told them that you needed this kind of apparatus and mechanical support to take a picture, they would look at me like I was absolutely crazy. And I think similarly, as we plan for our classrooms today, as we seek resources, the thought of using static and expensive textbooks is increasingly becoming as antiquated as the flashbulb you see. Whether it's finding digital assets, whether it's purchasing digital assets through your school district, whether it's doing your own research and curating your own materials, finding things online, finding things in digital format is absolutely the way the information highway works. What OER does is give you some protection, not only in terms of the validity and the quality and the credibility of the resources you find, also the context of those resources, and again, maybe more importantly, the Creative Commons copyright that allows you to do anything you want to do with these materials in your classroom. And of course, the punchline here is any teacher, anywhere, I feel comfortable saying, always modifies what they find online. You never do it as a script. You find ways to change and to edit and to adopt. In fact, you likely do it from class to class. In fact, you likely do it from student to student. What this platform and what OER as a concept does is allow you the support to do that work in a more formal and a more open and public way. So I'm going to share with you today the Humanities in Class Digital Library. I put the link in the chat box there. I invite you to register for a free library card. It will take you about 25 seconds to do so. And again, you can explore both during today's session as well as afterwards. As an introduction, I'm going to offer OER as a noun. And that noun means that if nothing else, with a library card, you can access resources in this digital library. And as a noun, there are fully vetted, fully trustworthy resources on the library shelves. I apologize, I'm going to really wear out the metaphor of the library today. And when you enter the library, you can find anything that's been created at the National Humanities Center. That includes lessons, that includes primary source collections, that includes essays written by scholars for non-experts and the general public. It includes recordings and the associated resources of all of our webinars and our online courses. It includes podcasts. It includes work in other fields and other disciplines that you might be interested in bringing into your social studies classroom. So by going to the library, you can approach it as a card catalog and go and use the keyword search and find the resources you want and immediately save them and make them available for you in your instructional planning. We've also, though, invited over 80 other content providers to contribute to these digital shelves. And it's that, I think, that begins to create not just a place to get the National Humanities Center material, but it's a place to find in cross-discoverable library science materials from other organizations as well. These organizations really do run the gamut. They're across the humanities fields. They are, in some cases, international archives, in some cases, nationally known organizations. In other cases, they're smaller organizations, whether they're state or local, but they all have great content. And what they want is the same thing that we want, which is to make these resources available in one place for you educators to use them. So when you come to this card catalog, as I describe it, and you type in certain keywords, you can find National Humanities Center work, but you can also find in the same search results materials from other organizations. This is intended to be a little underwhelming, meaning if you type in a certain keyword search like Black Lives Matter, you'll find 13 high quality resources, but you won't find 33 million. And that's kind of the point. This isn't Google, it's not Pinterest, it's not a place to go and get all things for all people, but what you do find and what you do have access to is of the highest quality. And the organizations that have contributed are also now understanding and being interested in amplifying their work through this process. And I want to apologize. If I'd known you'd been with me today, I would have your logo here. But I think if nothing else, what it does do is show you the breadth of organizations like U.S. History Scene, which is an archive of video clips that correspond to U.S. history, developed at Princeton University by Raylan Barnes. It's a beautiful site, except it doesn't have the reach that Raylan needs it to have as a professional historian. New York Historical Society, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with their work and the ways that they approach inquiry-based education in the humanities. And then others that are newer organizations like World History Center at University of Pittsburgh, who are developing lessons and activities around world history and global studies topics. And then finally, one that I'm sure you recognize, Connecticut Humanities, which again, really believes in supporting K-12 educators, but needed a platform to try to magnify that work in a larger context. When you sign up for a library card, again, it's free and open. Anybody can sign up for one. There's no limitation. I would encourage you, by the way, to share this information with your faculty and your colleagues and your network. What this library card does do is give you access to a private profile. And in that profile, you can select and curate resources based on any theme that you like, whether it's standard-based, topical, discipline, some other sort of folder that you want to put together. And it also allows you to provide biographical information to connect with others who are using the library professionally. I would encourage you also to explore the curated collections that we've made. These collections are sets of materials, exhibits, you can think of them as, that pull together resources around specific themes like voting and why it's important, or teaching about race, place, and social justice. In that one set of materials, you'll find resources from all of our organizations that have contributed along those themes. I think it's also important because if nothing else, we want to be practical and relevant. It's also important to point out that the digital library, while it's not a learning management system, can be connected to any LMS that you might be using in your virtual classroom right now, and that includes Google Classroom. So you can actually connect the work of the library and make it available in your own virtual space. And I've also worked with some teachers around the country who have created spaces for their students to actually get library cards and engage with material, whether that's engaging with primary source collections or video lectures or other materials that have been curated and pulled together. This can be, under your guidance and facilitation, a way to expand it into your own teaching. Otherwise, this is largely a teacher-facing, professional-facing resource. And any way that you decide to modify that is certainly welcome, and we'd be happy to help you. So let me give you some examples of what you'll find, because again, I think the currency of any resource is the material in that resource and the partners that we have. And I would say that as you look into the library, you'll notice that there are largely two sort of defining characteristics of the materials in the library. And one of them I would call scholarly materials. These are essays and articles, blogs, video recordings, primary source collections, bibliographies, training materials. These are materials created by professional experts in humanities fields and intended for an adult audience. It doesn't mean, by the way, that they're not also applicable for younger students, but these aren't lessons. These aren't instructional in nature. This is the content itself. Let me give you an example. You might recognize this great American writer, often called and frequently acknowledged as one of the best American poets. Mid-19th century, Walt Whitman wrote Leaves of Grass at a time when the country was deeply divided. It was a time where the fracture and the crack in the porcelain of the American identity seemed to be almost irreparable. I mean, it was, as all of you know, it was as contentious and as disturbing and as sideways as any time, including the present. And while you're social studies teachers, you likely also understand the value of literature and interdisciplinary work in your social studies classes, whether that's a direct curricular connection in an American Studies class and course, or if it's just a way for you to introduce the language of identity in your social studies classes. There is a place for bringing in these other disciplines. And I've always found as an educator that sharing verse from a Song of Myself like this one, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. It's such a powerful short verse to help students understand that we're very layered people, that the polarization that has occurred doesn't put us in these kind of predictable, assumptive demographics that never change, but we have many, many different sides to ourselves and views of ourselves and worldviews that are edited and change and evolve over time. And as you get a little bit deeper in the verse of Walt Whitman, you might notice this line, another favorite of mine: "For every atom belonging to me, as good belongs to you," which to me is just a lovely way of reminding us that we're all connected and we all share some sense of community, of connection. Hey, I see my old friend Tommy joining us. Good to see you, Tommy. That there's a way for these verses to speak, literally 175 years later and remind us of that identity. One of the scholars that we've worked with recently, actually, she's not a scholar, she's a filmmaker and a writer, is a documentarian named Jennifer Randall. And Jennifer, as a journalist and a documentarian and a writer, was very interested in using this kind of verse to help us explore the assumptions that we make about other Americans and about the identity of ourselves and the ways we can connect with them. And I'm not going to tell her own personal story, although you can find both a written and video description of how she approached this project by Jen in the digital library. What she was really interested in is finding ways to have the words of the past, the classic words of the past, affect and inform contemporary issues. So over the last several years, she has traveled the state of Alabama. Alabama is probably one of those states in the country where people make a lot of assumptions. They sort of have a mental model for what it means to be from or in Alabama. I suspect that a lot of those assumptions are not always pleasant or not always positive, but maybe they are. But we have assumptions about what it means to be from Alabama. And by the way, we do too of someone from New York or someone from a city, right? There's all kinds of assumptions that we place on people based on the ways that we see them from their geography. So Jen traveled Alabama with her film crew and sort of instinctively met everyday Alabamians and invited them to recite stanzas from Song of Myself. and created what I find to be the most beautiful digital project I've ever seen. Right now, there are 25 published stanzas. She's got plans to complete the 52 stanza project in the next year, year and a half. And this is the kind of access that you have through the digital library. I'd like to share one with you, see if you have the same reaction I do, which is generally tears. Rachel, I can't see you right now. Do you mind just turning on your camera? Thumbs up if you can hear the audio when I play it, okay? So I'm gonna play a short clip. This is Virginia May Schmidt.
Look right here for me, Virginia May. Just like you are, looking right here at the camera.
Don't move. Stay right there. Just starts like that.
And start like this?
And then starts. What do you
I
think?
like it. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Is this before or after the drink of water?
No drinking.
No drinking. No drinking in this home.
I actually put some whiskey in there.
No, shoot. I thought you were going to bring me a scotch and soda. I celebrate myself and sing myself. And what I assume, you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood formed from this soil, from this air. Born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, and in perfect health, begin, hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools and events, retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard. Nature without check, with original energy.
That was excellent. Yeah. Pretty good at this.
Did we get it?
They called her One Take Virginia May, by the way, because she did that in one take. None of the vignettes that you can access on the digital project, in the digital project, were scripted, meaning they didn't find, familiar, camera-friendly, ready to go kinds of folks. These are literally the cross-section of Alabama, adding their voice to the words of the 1850s. And for me personally, that's such a powerful way to ask students to not only get some sense of historical empathy and empathy for others, but also start to make sense of the connections that we have through the words, through the literature, and through the other, the key sources of social studies that you can share. I've worked with teachers and educators who have done a lot of things with this project to apply it to the classroom, and that does include asking students to read passages of something that would pull them into common, whether it's the Constitution, whether it's passages from other works of literature or poetry, or even writing something themselves and letting another student read the words of a friend or a peer, and just be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And so I would invite you to look through this website. Again, there are about 25 full vignettes. None of them are longer than 5 or 6 minutes, maybe. I think there's one that's maybe 12 minutes, but they're generally very short and very consumable verses and stanzas of Song of Myself. This is the kind of resources that are free and open and available in the digital library, and gives you one place to go and not only access the project itself, but all the other corresponding and associated materials, including a recording of a webinar I did with Jen Crandall just a few nights ago. I'm not going to play another one. I'm keeping my eye on the clock because I have several other resources I'd like to share with you as an illustration of what you can find in the digital library if you were to use it as a card catalog. So here's another example. If you can find scholarly materials that are very intentional and very informed resources and collections and projects designed by professional experts, you can also find in the library instructional resources that are developed both by the organizations represented as well as the members of the library itself. And these instructional materials are the kinds of resources that you likely will gravitate to as well. Things like activities and lessons and units and assessments and pedagogical approaches and PowerPoints. So anything that lives digitally can be hosted in the digital library. The key is to have those things on those shelves be vetted and be approached in the way that we're describing. So I'd like to give you an example of a lesson you can find in the digital library. This one might take a little bit of chat participation if you're game. And so working with our partners at the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation based in New York City, I'm going to offer you the following activity and ask you to participate in the chat box. So this is called the playlist activity. And I've seen this be very effective with students of really any age, upper elementary, all the way through college level educators. And of course, the way to differentiate is to change the questions and the prompts. So I'll do one that's applicable maybe to the group that I imagine are behind the screens today. So there is an individual that I have in mind. And what I've done is pull together 3 songs that somehow will give you insights to who this person is. And your job is to guess who it is based on the clues, based on the oral clues, the audio clues, maybe the words or the lyrics. What I'd like you to do is to tell me in the chat box who you think this person is based on the songs that I'm about to share. This could be a historical, could be contemporary, it could be from any time period, it could be a literary, it could be a fictional character or somebody from a source. Your job is to come up with and determine from these songs who this person is. So I'm going to play these songs one at a time. And as soon as you think you know who it is, put the name in the chat box. First person who gets it right gets a free online course with the National Humanities Center. Okay, I'm doing it on Zoom, so I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to go back just so I can now speak over those songs. I'm going to go through them one more time. Your job is to tell me what person, what historical figure all these songs somehow allude to or refer to. First song was Bob Dylan, Tangled Up in Blue. Second song was God Save the Queen. And the third song was Hey Bulldog by the Beatles. I'm going to go through them a little bit faster this time. Tell me who you think this mystery character is.
And I was standing on the side of the road, rain falling on.
Okay, any guesses? Maybe I'd like to type into the chat box who you think the historical character is that is referenced and alluded to from those 3 songs. Any guesses at all? I know Tommy Ender's a big music fan, and I bet Ann Prescott is too, but who do you think that historical figure is?
I'll let somebody else answer that question.
That's because, Rachel, you're supposed to do it with a period or an exclamation point, not a question mark. Yes, in fact, it is Winston Churchill. Great job. Freak. All right, I'm going to do this one more time. So see how fast you can get it this time, Rachel. Here we go.
it was only yesterday. Gee, ain't it funny how...
Any guesses? Double extra credit for the person who noticed that one of the facts on the last slide was unfortunately wrong. Yep, there you go, Anne. I have found it to be a very effective lesson to ask students to construct narratives using songs. They love making playlists, again, students at all ages. I often ask them to make playlists and bring them in around particular characters, but I also, whether it's an assessment or a formative activity, or any way you can structure that. And of course, as an educator, you can modify that based on the level you teach to make it more complicated or less complicated. You can make the characters or the figures either more identifiable or less. You can really level what you're doing based on how students can conceptually represent an individual through their understanding of song. This activity is one of the activities in an online course that we offer called From the 60s to Now. Again, we're working with the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation to explore ways that music can be used in social studies curriculum. And I'd encourage you, if you're interested in that lesson, to perhaps consider the course as well. So I'm going to give you a third example then of the language of protest, or the language of identity. And this is one that probably as social studies educators, you're also familiar with, and maybe this combines the two qualities of the resources you'll find in the library. The first were kind of the raw sources and interpretive sources of a digital project. The second was a very clear instructional activity that you can modify and differentiate with. This third one maybe is a little bit of both. So this is a primary source. And as social studies educators, you probably feel very comfortable asking students to engage in a source, even one that is so sort of jarring like this one. So I'm going to ask you to do the same just for a minute and use the chat box to do so. Take a moment and close read this image for me. Take a look at all the details in it. Probably what many of you would do with students, really students of any age, is to ask them to go through the process of what do you see, and what do you infer, and what do you wonder about? What do you guys see there? Again, use the chat box. You're welcome to unmute yourself too if you like. What's happening in this image, which is not just jarring but disturbing, right? It's an image of violence. It's an image of violation and intrusion. Some of the components or the elements of this image that jump out quickly. As educators, we're often very comfortable sort of assuming or anticipating what students might see. And I think, Anne, your comment is spot on. What jumps out immediately is the stark color of the bra, blue bra, versus the sort of the grayscale of what's around it. Rachel's also right. She's unarmed. She's surrounded by men who are all armed. And being armed doesn't necessarily, to my eye, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're officials. In fact, a couple of them look sort of militaristic, but certainly the person, I'm assuming that it's a man, but don't really know. But the person on the right with their left leg sort of cocked to stamp on her doesn't look like, that looks like a militia almost, just like a normal person. Yeah, he's wearing tennis shoes, as you suggest. They don't have uniforms. It doesn't look like they're necessarily removing her clothes as much as by yanking her and pulling on her clothes are coming off. So it doesn't look like that kind of violence, but it's certainly not my place to draw that distinction. It looks like they're holding pipes rather than guns or other kinds of more formal issues. It does look a lot like PPE, although I don't know that this is that contemporary of an image. And some of them, look at the guy in the upper right-hand corner. He's not even really looking at the scene. How could you take your eyes off of this? And he's he's looking somewhere else, whether that's at somebody coming towards them who might be intervening, or somebody else. He almost seems bored by it, to my eye. Of course, there's a lot to unpack in this image, but this image is a particularly powerful one when you study modern Middle East, and the subsequent Women's March that that really 9 years ago, pardon me, 9 years ago, really led to a lot of democratic revolution led by women in the modern Middle East. And it was all associated with that blue bra, and the amount of graffiti and the amount of ways that artwork and sort of commonplace graffiti was used to represent that blue bra. It really became an icon of revolution and revolt. And there are numerous ways to document and define this blue bra symbol scattered across Syria, scattered across other cities in the Middle East, to some of them very stark, some of them very powerful, like this one. Some of them like this that has a direct reference to superheroes and super figures, and the ways that translated then to democracy, to the democratic systems of elections and voting, and women who were not only using the color and the symbol of the blue bra, but finding ways to motivate and to communicate in Morocco, in Yemen, and elections of June of 2012 that could specifically be pointed back to the blue bra, as it's known, the blue bra incident. These are the kinds of primary source collections that you can find in the digital library as well. This one was contributed by a past fellow, Ellen McLarney, who's a professor of Asian studies at Duke. And understanding the ways that revolution can be represented by social media, by art, by graffiti, by icons, by iconography, is also a really interesting way to allow the humanities to make sense of these really complicated topics. We also, by the way, have an online course titled Understanding the Modern Middle East, which gets very directly into the work and the scholarship around that incident, the Blue Bra incident, and contextualizes it, as well as provide other resources that you can use in your own classrooms. And if you're interested in just this notion of using visual literacy, of working with students to understand how to unpack images, whether they're photographs or pieces of art or other kinds of illustrations, we also have an online course called Becoming Visually Literate in the Humanities Classroom. This one too incorporates Library of Congress sources. So what I attempted to do is give you 3 examples of what you would find in the card catalog of the Humanities Class Digital Library. And if you approach that main page and you type in a keyword like blue bra, or like playlist activity, or like Winston Churchill, these are the kinds of resources that you can have access to. But I also want to encourage you to consider this as not just a card catalog, but also as a library press. This OER platform does give you, through the Open Author tool, the ability to do 2 things that I think are incredibly important for instructional planning and design. The first is you can contribute and publish your own instructional work in the library with direct citation to you and your name under the National Humanities Center letterhead. So it is a place to not only share your work, it's a place to publish your work and have that then accessed by others. I find that university level educators, both in the College of Arts and Sciences as well as schools of education, are using this to share research or to share their commentary on the world or the ways that we can approach 21st century education through this library press. I also find that teachers and educators are finding this to be a really robust way to share their work with colleagues in their schools, but also colleagues in other schools or other states or other parts of the country. It's a very straightforward and easy process. The Add OER button gives you the ability to contribute. It's always looked at by us first to make sure that the library science is precise and it's discoverable, and then we publish it. The second thing you can do, however, is remix other resources. And I think this is even more important from an educator's perspective. That remixing option allows you to engage with OER now as a verb, not just as a noun. OER is a process of curricular planning, of finding resources that you want to use in your teaching, and then applying them in a very particular way. That remix button allows you to take an existing lesson or piece of instruction and to modify it and adopt it and change it and republish your version of it with direct citation to the original. So the playlist activity is there, but let's say you want to publish it with a completely different context. You can do so under your name, but there will be a version history that shows you where that originated. And now as curriculum leaders, as instructional support staff, as colleagues in departments, you can start to see how lessons or activities or instruction evolves over time and how it can be applied to a 6th grade classroom, an 11th grade classroom, or an undergraduate classroom, or ways that you can take the Blue Bra images and organize them in different ways instructionally and then publish multiple versions of that so that we can all see the impact and the influence of that original source material. I find that to be work that we've been doing as teachers for many, many years. Everybody does that anyway, right? You get a good idea, you find something that's inspirational or aspirational even, and you take it back to your classroom and you do what you need it to do. This provides you with a platform and a community to share that with others and to see the evolution of that particular work. And it's that remixed work, I think, that will really go a long way to helping you be a leader in your own instructional process. A couple other functions of the library I'd like to point out before we conclude today. There is a community aspect as well. Imagine this as a conference room in the library. Anybody can start a group, and that group can be closed or open. If it's closed, it means that you have to invite others, or they request to enter the room, they knock on the door, and you allow them to come in. You can start a group around any interest or any theme or geography. You could have a Connecticut Council for the Social Studies group. You could have a New Haven Public Schools group. You could have 8th grade history teacher group. You could have great education researchers trained at UNC who are now teaching in Connecticut groups. So, that group can be defined by you. And then as the moderator, you can interact with those in the group through discussion, through membership, through shared curated resources. And as a member of that group, you also have access to the materials that we provide to help you and your colleagues now do OER. It's not just getting materials online anymore. Most teachers, most of us as human beings go to Google now and we find what we want. What we'd like to offer is that the digital library gives you a trusted place to go to access materials that are free and open, in which the copyright is fair use and is non-commercial, meaning you can't come and get the good stuff and sell it somewhere. So it's a community you can trust, and it's a place where you can publish your own innovation and you can share that with others more broadly. And ultimately, I hope that's the kind of use that we will find in the digital library, and we certainly have to date. One last thing I'll share is our early adopter school network. Right now we have, I think, 17 schools from around the country who are involved in our early adopter network. There's no funding involved in this whatsoever. Everything I'm sharing today is free and open. What this does do is give those schools and cohorts direct access to us and to the support of the center and all of our colleagues and collaborators. So certainly there are perks involved in that, but I think more importantly, what we're hoping is that we can contribute to any curriculum that you're planning. So if you come to the library and you've got a project where you want to design some new curriculum, not only can you find the resources, but you can work with experts in those fields to help you make sense of them and organize them in particular ways. It says 15, we've had a couple more come up recently. I think we have 2 in Massachusetts. We have 2 in New York City. I'd love to have one in Connecticut. Our farthest away cohort right now is Bering Strait School District in Western Alaska. We also have 2 community colleges and 1 university. So regardless of where you're from, what level, this might be something that's of interest to you as an OER creator. So that's my presentation for today. I really do appreciate you joining me and playing along, engaging with the activities. I would encourage you to follow us on our social media, both Twitter and Facebook, so you can be apprised of upcoming opportunities. Anytime you have questions about the library or the ways that the center can support you, please do reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to brainstorm with you. We have a lot of resources to offer, and we're anxious to advance humanities education in Connecticut.